So before us, we are very pleased to have the following individuals. In the center, Dan Flippo, who is the Deputy Chief of the Santa Cruz Police Department. Jennifer Beusing, who is the Assistant Division Director of the Santa Cruz County Probation Department. And Rob Wade, who is Chief Deputy of the Santa Cruz County District Attorney's Office. So I'd like to welcome them and give them a round of applause. I'm going to back out of the questions for just a moment. You kind of get a read from the room. So there's this word in French called esprit de corps, and it has to do with the morale of a group. So if you're willing to participate, which is voluntary, with a scale of 1 being very low morale and 5 being high morale, how are you feeling today? Let's start with the ones. I mean, you want to raise your hand as being in the low morale category? 2s? Maybe it's too early to ask. Oh, 3s.
It depends on the topic.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a really good.
Maybe at the end.
So just in general, with everything going on, I saw some 3s, 4s.
Amen.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Maybe in a -10 national. 5s? Right. Okay, thank you very much for that little query. On April 4th of this year, the Santa Cruz Police Department and the Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women launched, with assistance from Julie Schneider, the victim's advocate, who's standing in the back of the room with a bad case of, I think, laryngitis. So she's here to support us all. The global campaign transforming the way we respond to sexual assault, called Start by Believing, and was mentioned this morning at the mic by Brooke Newman. And this, I have another question of curiosity. How many of those in the room were there on April 4th? Yeah, Dan had to be there. So did Julie. Okay, I was there. So here's the question, and this is probably focused with Dan, but the 3 of you are welcome to chime in. How has the Start by Believing pledge changed SCPD's response to intimate partner violence calls? And what does the program mean to our officers? Those are my questions. You can depart from there. We'll take about 5 minutes on this.
So initially, after the program started, obviously we weren't able to have all of our officers at the kickoff event, but so then we, provided some training and explained what the program is. Really, I think at the heart of it is emphasizing the fact of providing respect and compassion for the survivors or the victims, and making sure that we do everything possible to initiate and follow through with a detailed investigation. And that can vary case by case. But then the other aspect of that is really looking at the individual of the case. There's all kinds of training out there as far as intimate partner violence, and so we can have national scale type training, but really kind of focusing on what are our local resources, how does our local court process work, and trying to provide that information to the victims and steer them really towards the best resources that are going to be applicable to their situation, because each individual, for lack of a better word, of crime that we investigate is very unique for that individual, the circumstances that they're in and the crime. So instead of just looking at it simply like, what are the facts of the crime? We've established the facts, we forward it to the DA's office for prosecution. Really looking with our other resources and how do we steer that individual, because it's just as an example, if you have an individual that their whole network of support is all within the suspect, that's a very unique system. And I can't just say, oh, here we're gonna, here's your solution to remove yourself from, maybe they need to remove yourself completely from the home and all that, because that may feel then like all of a sudden we've just created more of a sense of hopelessness. And so how do we meet the needs of that individual and not just broad, okay, we've got our facts and we're on to the next thing. You know, we've got our facts of our case, we can do whatever and then we're moving on, and really trying to look at that more of as an individual approach and making sure that they have access to the resources that will meet them where they're at.
So I'd add to, so what Dan's talking about is that there's that piece that begins with when they have contact with the victim and they're talking about it, trying to steer them to resources. The case gets submitted to the district attorney's office. There are cases that we file, there are cases that we see problems with proof with. All of those people, though, regardless of whether the case is filed or not, are people that can contact our office and get resources to help them in their case. And sometimes also it is that they don't want to go forward with a criminal prosecution. That is not first of all, in domestic violence cases, that's not unusual at all. But there are still resources for them regardless of whether we go forward or not. And then that is a situation in terms of providing resources for counseling. Also, if they're going to go forward in the case, it's like giving them information and actually walking them through the system as far as like this is what's going to happen with regards to the case. So those are really factors that we use. And I would just say in terms of the cases that we handle, victim witnesses for me is a very important part of that, because the prosecutors are really focused on trying to pull the case together and to prove the case. So we need and are very much rely and are very grateful for the help and the assistance that victim witness provides, because we're there doing this part of the case as far as seeing that we can prove it and that we can get the appropriate result, which would be, you know, restraining orders. Sometimes, you know, what kind of punishment, all of those things. But we very much rely on victim witness to deal with those people, and so that happens within our office. That also happens through Santa Cruz PD and Julie Schneider. So all of us are working towards the same result, which is to get those people through the system. Because the last thing that I would say, and one of the things that I've recognized from the time that I became a prosecutor, is that when people come into this system, they are like people who have shown up and they are they're about to go on a river trip, and not a particularly pleasant river trip also. So there are things that we can tell them as far as like, okay, so when we start out, it's going to be relatively smooth water, but fairly soon we're going to be getting into these rapids. Then there may be smooth water. Then there may be just these long periods where the case doesn't go forward because we're struggling with the courts to get the case to trial or get the case to preliminary hearing. And so we need to prepare them for those eventualities. And so that, because it's challenging for, in particular, but lots of different cases, but murder cases, domestic violence cases, sexual assault cases, one of the challenges is getting those cases to finality. And they are understandably upset and frustrated when it takes, you know, a long time to do that.
And then that's when probation is able to come in for those cases where there is a conviction. Probation engages, and we have the opportunity to build a relationship with both the offender and the survivor, and we then can start to remind them of all the services that were provided. As we know, oftentimes it takes many times to engage. Maybe they didn't take advantage of the services initially, and then we can come in and offer those same services and additional services as well to hope that we can support them in taking advantage of all the services that have been offered.
I'm going to move to another topic, which is the Sexual Abuse Response Team, SART. So as some of you may know, since last summer we're in a transition with the SART program, and that will relocate from Santa Clara County back to our county, and it will be at Dominican Hospital, January 2019. This is the weather forecast. I'm hoping it sticks this time. So, what is the police relationship with the SART team? And what is the police stance on the current status of the SART program?
Well, throughout the years, I think we've had a good relationship with the staff. The nurses that have pretty much volunteered to do the extra training and be part of this team. The current stance, we're not happy with it. We're not happy with the fact that it went over the hill. The personal relationships that we had with the nurses and the other staff that were directly involved with the program, it's different now. It's different in the fact that when we have to transport somebody over the hill, we can't even call ahead and say, hey, we're incoming, with one and try to set it up. It's not until we arrive and actually do the admission. And so then we get put into a queue, and that really puts the victim in a bad situation now, where they're waiting sometimes a longer period of time to even get the exam, started and even meet with the nurse. And so, we've worked immediately with Julie Schneider, our victim advocate. As soon as we kind of heard that this is what was happening, we started trying to look in, okay, what can we do? We don't oversee, the police department doesn't oversee the program. We do contribute financially to it, but it was, what can we do to try to bring it back on a local level? Because I think that's just better for everybody, and it's better for us too, because if you have that local connection, one of the things I didn't answer on the first question was the fact that it's really also, there's a lot of training on the individual officer, and when they're going out there and asking these questions, and there are difficult, these are all difficult cases, but some cases have some difficulty in the prosecution. And then how do we cover some of those difficulties, is when we're thinking ahead of like, okay, just those facts of the case are going to be a potential defense. And so how do we interview around that and forensically examine and get the evidence around that without making the victim feel like we're accusing them of some conduct or something? And so that is a challenge. And so that's one of the things that, we take care. Our investigation sergeant will review these cases responded by the initial officer. And then we're looking at, okay, is there initial training that we need on an individual basis, officers? Like, hey, how you came across in this situation could be perceived as that, and that's not helpful. But then having that personal relationship with the staff for SART, we kind of lost that too. We used to say like, hey, when we were talking to, the survivor during this, this action of your officer, which may have been totally benign by the officer, unintentional, but knowing that, hey, when you did this, it made this person feel this way, we kind of lost that connection. And so we're hoping that we can have that as well, so that, ultimately we want, we want to make sure, because as Rob has said, it's then going through the court case it's very trying. And so, what can we want to make sure that we kind of, for lack of a better word, got off on the right foot as the investigating agency with the survivor at this point, and then how do we, help them initially right on start to navigate that system and what's coming. And, we don't bat 1,000, we're trying, you know what I'm saying, but there's cases, and that's where we've got to look back at this and really look at, okay, and be accountable. We got, we've been asked, like, why was somebody transported in handcuffs over to a SART exam? In that case, the person was in custody for a felony, and then they disclosed, and there's a flight risk. So there's all these nuances to that case, but we have to be open to answer that. It's like, yeah, normally we don't have a survivor that gets handcuffed and take it to the exam. But we need to be open and be able to explain the why of why our actions, but then also knowing, being honest with ourselves and being open to that why.
So Rob, you had some comments before we started about experience that you've had with maybe in a different area, but regarding SART. Would you like to add to this at this point?
Well, before I was the DA's office in Santa Cruz for a number of years. I was up north, and in my old county, I was involved in getting a SART team started when I took on a sexual assault assignment. And as Dan said, these are really challenging cases in terms of what is happening for the victim as they get inserted into this. And so one of the things, which is really unfortunate at this point, but as we were saying, hopefully we'll have this back in our county. I hadn't heard the January 2019. I'm like, well, that would be really great. But it is that one can appreciate that you've been through a really traumatic event, and now we're taking you to a place, and it's not here, and so we're going to drive over the hill, and that's going to take 45 minutes, maybe an hour in terms of the whole thing getting set up, and then it's not the way that we want this to happen. And what we're always trying to do is make this as we're trying to reduce the additional trauma from them going through this exam. And the exam is, in itself is just different. And but that's really important in terms of trying to collect evidence which will corroborate the case. And sexual assault cases are challenging for a number of reasons. But in those situations where we think that we can get physical evidence, that's something that's really important. So I would say, one is that both the law enforcement, including the district attorney's office, is very anxious to get this thing back on course in terms of the fact that we have our sexual assault examiners here. And the thing I just mentioned also, having done this, all of us up here have been doing this for some time, is that there are just sort of these challenges as far as programs go through different points, and sometimes everything is going great, and then we're not thinking, boy, everything's going great, we're just expected to be that way. And then what happens is we lose examiners, there's various things that go on, and suddenly we're in a situation where we don't even have any examiners, and we're going over the hill to do that. Those are good, those are really good quality exams, but that's not good for, in our view, the victim with regards to the case. And so what I would hope is that in the near future we'll be back on a track as far as having a group of examiners that are here, that are in Santa Cruz County, or would come to Santa Cruz County to do these exams when we need to.
I have a question. I'm wondering, in October there's domestic violence reporting numbers usually given out in the paper, and over the year that seems about 400 a month. The 911 calls for domestic violence, at least in October, it's around 400, because that's the only month I'm aware of. Are those statistics consistent roughly throughout the year? And if so, have you seen any trends downward through any efforts in the community to address those problems? Is anything getting better? Or are you getting worse? Number-wise?
That's one thing I did not do is poll what's that? Yeah, you want to answer that, Julie, as far as, because I haven't pulled them.
In terms of numbers in the city of Santa Cruz, we remain fairly consistent. I think we hover around somewhere around 200 calls for service per year, whether or not those transit into the district attorney's office or not. At Santa Cruz Police Department, we not only write reports around domestic violence, but also what we call domestic violence incidents. They may not raise to the level of domestic violence, but there was enough concern that our officers will document it as a kind of a history of what's going on within the family. So our numbers remain fairly consistent. There's always a lot of work being done trying to get people to acknowledge and learn more about domestic violence. For instance, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Walnut Avenue Family Women's Center, Monarch Services, who's also here. We're a fairly small county, and I should also say here I'm at the university. We're a fairly small county, so as advocacy organizations, we all work pretty effectively hand in hand. But domestic violence is just a really, really challenging crime to resolve. There's a lot of emotion and feeling, and so it's a lot more than just, oh, go out and doesn't let anything to jail. It's very much a social problem, and that's kind of how we need to start addressing it as a social problem. Does that help?
So I know there's going to be questions. We're supposed to end at 11, and we've had a little bit of flexibility on the schedule. Collectively, would you guys be willing to be here till like maybe 5 after 11? Does that work? So I'll take one more question, but I need to ask you to be concise because I'm going to try to give 5 to 10 minutes at the end, and we're only halfway through what I'm going to ask you. So with that understanding, if you've got a burning issue you really want to ask on this topic, go for it. Otherwise, let's wait till the end. Okay.
I'm just wondering about stats for Santa Cruz County, because you were just talked about Santa Cruz City.
Right.
Do we have any, is it going up, is it level, down, up?
I think it's been, as I've said, it's been pretty consistent through the years, and so, yeah, we still, have work. I'd like to see it definitely go down, obviously, and I think everybody in this room would like to see that. So we have the work ahead of us on that aspect, but that's part of the whole community conversation as well.
And those on probation, both in North and South County, and the numbers have stayed consistent as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I just would add, I think Julie's point to it was also, this is a social problem, and I can't think of something that's suddenly happening where, we responded, law enforcement responds to these calls, but I can't see anything that changes the dynamic that's, gone on for a very long time. So to me, I would be surprised if there was a dip or an escalation. It's something that both law enforcement and the district attorney's office deal with consistently throughout the year, and there isn't any point where we're thinking, gee, it's like suddenly it's gone down, and we would have no real way to explain if it went down or up.
So I'm going to add to that. Having been on the police committee with CPVO, which is a standing committee with the commission for a while, I know that there's also a consistent question about underreporting. So even though you've got numbers, and those of you who are asking about stats, I just want to add that to the algorithm. These are underreported situations. So we might be able to throw numbers your way, and yet I just want to give it another context for it.
Yeah, I just want to say, Julie from Walnut Avenue, that when we see an uptick, a lot of times that means, okay, people are feeling more comfortable coming forward.
Yes.
There's an achievement
Yes.
on our part. It means that, because this is such a crime that people don't want to report, don't want to speak up. So if we have more reporting, that speaks to trust in the police department and that they believe the services are going to help them. So actually,
that's
higher
right.
numbers for a little while, and we hope they go down.
That's that could definitely be the outcome. If we can have more people comfortable coming forward to us and speaking, being part of the process, we could actually see a dramatic increase, of that, and which would be a positive, to have that increase and have, but then it would look as, for us, it would look like all of a sudden, why did this crime spike, and that's a conversation that we will have to continue to have.
Same thing, I can see it going up, absolutely, if people felt comfortable coming forward. Going down, that's something, as Julie said, it's a social issue, and that's something that we just have to continue to work on. But if people felt comfortable reporting what's happened to them, that would be.
And we're really hoping, like, the next, phase will start by believing the seek and then speak, really providing people the information, knowing what the whole process is going to entail and why these questions are asked or all that. And so really getting ahead of that and getting that information out there, I think is something that we need to continue to work upon.
I just want to say that there's, with an increased threat of from doctors, people that are under DACA protection and other undocumented people that maybe would not be as likely to report under the current situation, that might see the numbers go down among certain communities, right?
Well, we've really tried to expand, and obviously we have more work to get that out, but we've been very public about our U visa program and our current administration, a chief of police. We're getting those out there and getting the victims or people that report in touch with Julie, who then creates the visa protection, the temporary visa protection through, and then the chief is signing off those. I don't have the total number, but I imagine it has gone up as we've put more and more of that information out that this is an offering, so that we're very committed to that.
I'd like to move to the subject of Santa Cruz Police Department procedures and arrests. Does SCPD have written policies and standards regarding responding to IPV, to intimate partner violence?
Yes, we do. We do have written policies, and then our procedure, as far as we make sure that the state standard is that they receive 4 hours of training every 2 years. We want to make sure, one, we're always consistently within that. We also make sure that we have continual training that occurs even within our roll calls. We'll have, Monarch Services or, the district attorney's office come in and train our staff frequently as well on how that. And then part of the process is with CAPVAL reviewing some of our investigations. Every one of an investigation that is started or has been initiated by an officer gets reviewed by an investigation sergeant, and then identifying which ones need to have immediate follow-up conducted onto them, and then routed through our victim advocate. And so that's pretty much it. We do.
How often is a dual arrest made, and how do you determine the dominant aggressor, which would be the most significant aggressor versus the first aggressor?
So it's very rare that we make a dual arrest, and then how we have to do that, and then really it comes down to the in-depth interviews, looking for not just the initial interview from both parties. We always make sure that when we go to the scene, that we're trying to separate the parties so that we can try to get and that's hard sometimes in the home. Then also make people feel that they're comfortable. They're in their home, but they're still not removed from the situation. So having those interviews in as much comfort and privacy as we can, to try to sort out that truth, but then looking for the consistencies of, oftentimes, both parties will have visible wounds. And so what is consistent with, so that's where then looking at not only interviews, but then the forensics of and then looking for and identifying the inconsistencies. And usually there are inconsistencies in those statements. So it's very rare that we'll make a dual arrest. In some of the rare cases that we have, it's typically because there's a third party, uninvolved party, that can view what has happened or whatever. But even so, it's very rare that both parties are arrested.
I want to come
And I don't
back
have the exact numbers for you, but I know I confirmed with Julie too, really looking at that, like how often this occurs, and it's very rare.
I'd like to come back to a topic on protections. What are the protections that are in existence for children that are, when you're looking at IPV scenarios, and also appropriate custody? Let's just start with that across the
Well, some of the immediate protections, like one of the things that we can do out in the field is if there are children involved, yes, the children are usually, depending on age, but they are typically interviewed, and that becomes part of the concern is and that's really changed over my career. I've been doing this for 27 plus years, so looking at as kind of the children were at the beginning, kind of, I hate to be crass, but kind of a side note, I'm just dealing with the adults here, but now it's like, well, there's trauma to the children as well, and that's kind of changed, that was a shift, and I know the newer officers are much better off than what I had to learn going through it. But one of the things that we can do is if, we can initiate an emergency protective order on behalf of the children, without, and sometimes that is exactly what needs to occur, because that way the intimate partner that's the victim, you know, it doesn't seem like, oh, they initiated all this, and they're thinking about, you know, what are the future repercussions if I do that? Well, then they can point to, well, hey, I didn't have any involvement, and it was the police initiated this on the behalf of the children. That's one of it. You know, children also, through victim witness, are entitled to counseling hours and are treated like just the same provisions as the direct victim themselves. And so making sure that we follow up with that and make sure that they have the same resources available like I said, that's changed over
And if they're
time.
convicted and placed on probation, probation's role is to continue to advocate and investigate. More information is gathered regarding the needs of the children and the family. If they are convicted, they're in a specialty domestic violence court. And so probation is taking an active lead with the court and the district attorney's office in creating shared case plans if there's a case in family court, to make sure that our case plans are similar and shared information. Probation will work with Child Protective Services, social services, the schools. We make it one case, which is the offender or the client, as we refer to them, but we also have the survivor and the family, as well as the batterers intervention program. And our main concern is the safety of the survivor, which oftentimes there's victims. So that is something that we give a lot of attention to. Oftentimes the protective orders may need to be modified, and we'll take an active role in assisting in that process.
Tuning things up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
One thing I'd add also, which is another optimistic thing, is I've been told, though not officially, that something the district attorney's office has been pushing for that we used to have years ago is a domestic violence court. And it's a domestic violence family law court, so that, because as Jennifer just mentioned, also you've got children that are involved in these situations where kinds of custody things are going on. And so the way it's been running for some time is there's just two railroad tracks and they're running separately, and maybe they wave to each other, you know, as they're going down the track, but there's not a judge that is familiar with both of those. And years ago, Judge Stevens, before he retired, he was did the domestic violence court, and along with family law, and we're we've been pushing for that for a long time, and I think we're actually close to that happening again, which would be much more efficient. We can't have things happening in family law court and the criminal court not knowing what's going on, and vice versa.
Also, under the subject of protections, how about neighbors who are living near a parole registered offender? How do they find out about that? And
Yeah, most of that information's online, and then, you know, one of the benefits of technology is, you know, being able to get that information out there.
And the sheriff's department is also actively involved. They're responsible for notifications if we have a sex offender registrant for neighbors. Probation also does that as well if we find information that a registered sex offender is living, working, engaging in certain activities in a certain area, then we take that responsibility to notify protected parties or parties that need that information.
And then protections that are in existence for survivors who are immigrants and or refugees.
Yeah, I briefly touched on that. That's with the U visa program, and making sure that they know if they can obtain a temporary visa and not worry about any deportation proceedings or anything being initiated, that they have this protection, and that's, you know, goes directly through our victim advocate, reviews the case, to contacts the person, starts the process of the U visa, and then it goes through our chief of police, who then signs it, and then that provides that.
Thank you. Probation. What type of best practices or trauma-informed care is incorporated in probation's work with DV offenders and their victims?
Well, I think so much of what we're all speaking about is trauma-informed care, trauma-informed policies, procedures, interactions that all of our agencies and our system is trying to engage. It's a value of the probation department to be trauma-informed. All of our probation officers are trained in trauma-informed care. We also are certified as trainers, so not only do we train each other ongoing, but we also train our agencies and partners that we work with. Try and create processes that are trauma-informed when we're working with families and offenders, and not just survivors. When we're working with offenders, we want to use motivational interviewing and best practices and supervising. But our job isn't to shame them for the harm that maybe they've brought into the home. It's to help increase their empathy and increase their accountability and understanding, so that we minimize that risk. And so a lot of it is our approach and how we work with our clients, but also real specific to domestic violence. The probation department is responsible for overseeing our batterers intervention program, and we help create the curriculum that they will provide, and we make sure that that is consistent with best practices. We are going to be bringing in a true evidence-based program. Hopefully this next year. There's a pilot program that the district attorney's office and the probation department is going to pilot in this county. So best practices in terms of assessing accurate risk and matching their risk with the appropriate programming. It's a big focus for our department. But again, so much of what we're speaking about is really being a trauma-informed system.
Thank you.
Could I add something? Because you hit a word that resonated. It was empathy, that sense of empathy, both along the person that's caused the harm, but then with the, and that's something that we've had to focus with our staff as well, because it's no longer law enforcement, just the facts, ma'am, and we're on to, it's really that sense of empathy, and that's hard. Just speaking honestly, it's hard, I think, sometimes for a young man or male or female police officer to go to that same house that they've been going to repeatedly, and it's just different messes with drug use or whatever other civil disturbances, and then now go to that call and being like, okay, I gotta forget all that kind of my, as I'm rolling to that, this house again, I'm rolling out to this house again, and you've got to be very careful. And I think that trying to reinforce some of that empathy, you've got to look at what is the call that is presented before you right then and there, because you can't, there's this history that lies into it, but this may be a different set of circumstances versus then that this is, for lack of a better word, this is just that messed up house that I go to all the time. Now I have something that is significant, and make sure that you just don't, just brush that one off. And I think that is something that our goal is with the Start by Believing, it's like, okay, we've got to look at that individual case, and make sure that those officers try to remember that. And that's, it's human nature too. We go into those things and really, delving down. So I just kind of a little bit off topic, but I mean, that word resonated.
We are talking about trauma to a community, trauma to a family. But when we're understanding trauma and trauma-informed, as we're all providers, service providers, we also have to understand and build an awareness of the vicarious trauma that can happen when you're working with, if you're a provider, if you're an officer, if you're trying cases, reviewing, even reading these reports. Everyone that deals with this population also can encounter trauma. And so just having an understanding of that. So in terms of trauma-informed care, there's a lot of work within all of our agencies to understand what trauma-informed care is and how to best serve this population.
How are domestic violence offenders treated differently than other criminal offenders in our county?
I spoke a little bit about the domestic violence cases as opposed to your average probationer, where your goal is to work specifically with that offender. Domestic violence cases, like I said, we have an offender, we have the survivor, the family, and the treatment provider. And again, our primary focus is the victim safety but then also making sure that there's compliance with the court-ordered terms. And one of those is always that they participate in a batterers intervention program that we certify. So we are very actively involved in their progress. There's a domestic violence court that is mandatory, where they go to reviews in court. And so probation is collaborating with the district attorney's office and the court, the batterers intervention program, the survivor and the offender on an ongoing basis. They have reviews, every 30, 60, 90 days in court. And we want to make sure not only are they attending, but that they're engaged and they're getting something out of the program. And again, what does that programming look like? We want to be evidence-based. We want to match their programming based on an ongoing assessment and reassessment of their needs and their risk to reoffend. So it's much more intensive than your average person on probation.
I would just add that probably of all the cases that prosecutors or district attorneys' offices deal with, domestic violence cases are the most challenging because it is not at all, it's routine. It is routine that victims recant after a point. I mean, they're in a bad situation. They call the police because they're afraid for their life, or all these different things that happen. They call, but the whole network, as far as this person is also a provider, they don't know exactly how they're going to provide. Otherwise, it's not unusual for them to recant, and so that. That makes those cases more challenging. There are different ways that we deal with it, but it's just that domestic violence cases are very challenging in that respect, that at a certain point, it's not unusual for the victim to recant.
So Jennifer, I'm going to ask for your input on this. We had one other probation question, but I think we've touched on it. That was about what is the role of the probation officer assigned to DV cases. Do you want to add anything to that? Because if you feel like we're good, I do want to segue to the DA's office. But
Sure, I feel like we're good. Ultimately, our job is to make sure that we work for the court and that the court-ordered terms are being complied with.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So, Rob, as you've already launched into this, I'll just read the question, but we're already on the edges. Discuss the challenges in DV and DV is domestic violence and SA is sexual assault cases, and the effectiveness in bringing them to trial in Santa Cruz County.
So I have touched on various parts of it. I think that in terms of the domestic violence cases, it's the challenge of keeping the victim on board with our case. We can do different things to still put the case on, even if the victim is not cooperative. And as I said, that's not something that's unique to Santa Cruz County, but that's something that I've seen everywhere. Sexual assault cases. I think one that we go forward with those cases. I would just say one of my greatest frustrations is that they take too damn long. And that has been something that I've seen. And I think that the courts have a role in that. What's going on in terms of the defense is, defense attorneys, their job is to represent their client and get the best disposition they can. They are aging those cases, and so they'll say, I need another continuance and this type of thing. So in my experience, one of the greater frustrations is that they take too long. And I've done sexual assault cases. I was a sexual assault prosecutor. It is, to me, very, very frustrating. If you can imagine, if you were you're a student, and they say, okay, today's the exam, you've studied, you've got everything ready and everything else, and you come to class and they say, well, that's been continued for 3 months, 6 months. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm ready to do this right now. And do you have any idea what it took for me to get ready for this? So that I think that there are unique challenges to prosecuting those cases, but one of the things that I wish that we had a better system as far as moving those cases through the system, because really one of the things as a victim that I have seen is that and it's one of the things that you try and tell them from the very beginning is you're about to go on a roller coaster ride. So some days you're going to feel really good, and other days, and then particularly when you show up for your test and you're ready to testify, and then they say case has been continued, then you're on the bottom part, and it's a roller coaster ride till we get to the end. Question.
Yeah, fireman.
So, in talking about how long these cases can continue, and in talking about how survivors can, in that process, recant their accusations or stories, do you feel that that has affected the outcomes of your veteran intervention program, or how do you think that affects how you analyze the effectiveness of your veteran intervention program? In other words, do you think that the veteran intervention program in some way contributes to this power and control dynamic in which, because of the length of the cases and because of that dynamic, violent survivors are recanting, or what is that interplay between those two forces?
And before anybody else answers, the word I'm really talking about is in sexual assault cases, and there isn't as much, there really isn't, I mean, in sexual assault cases, that's not the issue, is the recanting. Sexual assault, people come forward, they describe what's happened, and then we're generally on board as far as like going forward with that case. They're not going to recant. That would be, and frankly, if they did that in that particular situation, that case is over. But so we're talking about domestic violence cases, and that's the challenge there.
I'd like to come back to you, even though your question, I asked you to wait implicitly. So fire away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. My name is Susan Edward, First Survivors Healing Center. In terms of thinking about domestic violence, it operates on a spectrum. And from, like emotional abuse to sexual assault to murder, it's a spectrum. And for myself, I have a 22-year-old son who just graduated from UCSD a couple months ago, and his dad took me to court 3 times. When he was 2, when he was 12, when he was 16, and his dad was able to successfully use the family court to intimidate and bully and threaten me over his whole youth childhood, basically. So no thanks to the court. I realize the court is not, it's baked in, it's patriarchy, it's just baked in, and these things, the systems are rigged and can be used, in issues. So I think it's just really important to say that and also I feel like domestic violence is an economic problem at its root. And until we make sure that every man, every woman who wants a living wage job, affordable housing, all the things that we all need, that this is we're just gonna be running around in circles,